All right, here we go. All right, so Mariana is joining us today, and this is our first time meeting her in person through Zoom. But we connected through Athletic Brewing, which I think all of you know me enough at this point to know that I'm quite involved with their ambassador program. So I think you had reached out in October when we were doing the Sober October panel, but we already had enough people, and I was like, "Well, let me table you." Like, well, there's other opportunities. So that's how we connected. And you said you're from the outside of the DC area. But
Yes.
besides that, I'll let you do your intro and kind of take things from there. Usually these are very fun and informative and people ask questions. So don't be worrying about doing too formal of anything.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we got a good group here and hopefully some good questions for you.
Okay. Um, well, I do have a PowerPoint. I'm sort of on the fence about using it, but I'll go ahead and try. Sorry, it sounded like there was somebody.
It's okay. I just muted everyone. So hopefully we're back in action.
So yeah, my name is Marianna Cardozo. I am a licensed clinical social worker, as well as a certified personal trainer and a health coach with the American Council on Exercise. I run a health and wellness program for folks in recovery from mental health and substance use issues in a public health care agency. So I've been super lucky because I get to sort of combine a lot of different things that are passions of mine. And so that's kind of my lens as I work in public health, and I work with folks that are sort of historically underserved in a lot of different ways. And that's kind of a primary lens of mine in terms of health work. So I'm excited because I have not actually had this conversation with endurance athletes, which is a different population for me. So I'm going to go ahead. I just want to make that kind of give that context for what my lens is. And I'm going to go ahead and share this. And this is just kind of a working title. But yeah, so it's kind of the idea of gentle health. And that's what I talk a lot about in my work. And again, I think it's just an interesting opportunity to talk about it with folks who may have a different perspective on health and sports and things like that. So it's sort of the idea of the intersection of mental and physical health, particularly for folks who you're all in a cycling group, are clearly prioritizing physical health, which is wonderful. So that's kind of what we're looking at today. These are kind of lenses that I think are important, and I'm happy to hear your thoughts as we kind of bounce through them, but primarily that all bodies deserve to feel safe and empowered. That is a big one for me. And that is a lot of where I'm kind of coming from with this conversation. The belief that health and well-being should be self-defined and self-determined, with an emphasis on developing intuitive, compassionate, and trusting relationships with ourselves and our bodies. That is a really primary underlying belief that I bring to the work that I do. Obviously, I work at that intersection of mental and physical health. I think more people do than they realize. And that sort of values that I have around this work are prevention, harm reduction, and then finding everybody's individual sweet spot, I think is really important. So I just want to give you guys that kind of framework for where I'm coming from. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or I'll just keep rolling. Are folks able to unmute if they have questions, or? Okay.
Yeah, as far as I know, they should.
Okay. So what is gentle health? I don't know if anybody's ever heard this phrase before. Feel free to throw your hand up if you have, or shake your head if you've not. Okay. So these are some of the kind of bullets of the way I think of gentle health. It's something that's sustainable, that is individualized. It's person-centered, meaning it's really focused on what feels meaningful to that individual person. It's trauma-informed, so it's sort of recognizing that all of us are showing up every day with our own histories and our own needs and our own sensitivities, and being aware of that all the time. That it's accessible to each person, and so that can mean a lot of different things: accessible to your body, accessible to your resources, whatever the case, and equitable. And founded on self-compassion, and this is a big one, does not rely on shame or restriction as the primary mover, or as any mover in the process. So there are lots of different ways to bounce that around. These are sort of the kind of primary definitions I would give, but it's really developing a relationship with your body that is going to be in it for the long term. So befriending, right? And recognizing that this is the one, this is it, right? And this is the body that we get. How do we honor it in a way that we can do every single day, and not have sort of fits and starts and end up doing harm in the process. So being gentle with ourselves while we continue to move the ball forward. Any thoughts on that? Does it sound weird? Does it sound strange, different? Sound okay to folks? Okay. So yeah, the intersection of mental and physical health. Anybody have any thoughts on that before I jump into it? Any thoughts on what that means or what that looks like in your own lives? That intersection of mental and physical health?
For me, they're very connected.
Go ahead.
You?
For me, it's a combination of, if I don't take care of myself physically, I'm not in a good shape mentally. And I take care of my father with dementia. And when I've had a rough time with him, I have to go out and do something physical. Otherwise, I'll just keep circling it over and I'll go down the drain mentally.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So you've identified that physical movement is a big outlet for you.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah, much like Kim.
Calmer.
Yeah, I relate to Kim. I'm much like that too. Like physical health is so important for my mental health. I'm a counselor as well, so I have a different perspective of the mental health too, and there are challenging days in that. But yeah, so movement is important for me, and there's a lot of other self-care I do, just because of work as well. So.
And I kind of think the flip side of, if your mental health or your attitude is not in the right space, it can impact your physical health and the choices you make with what you eat or the exercise you do. So they do go hand in hand for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like after every time I work out, like no matter what, my mental health is better. Like even if I injure my ankle a little bit, even if my physical health like isn't there, the mental health, no matter what, is always 100% better. So definitely correlated.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, thank you. So there are lots of things to sort of consider here. I'm gonna pop back here real quick. Thinking about just kind of the idea that physical health and mental health aren't the same thing, right? Is I think one of, and Hunter, you may have some thoughts on this too, but one of those memes that always riles me a little bit is when there's a picture of pills and then there's a picture of the outdoors and they say, this is medicine, this is not. Drives me nuts, because some people need meds, right? Some people need all sorts of interventions, and mental health and physical health aren't the same thing. And they do interact with each other in all the ways you all described. And also they are distinct in some ways, and they have an influence on each other. And there's lots of research that has to do with the way that physical activity can positively impact mental health and also negatively when it's taken out of balance. They are still developing research around what that looks like for endurance athletes, but there is some research coming out now that sort of it's kind of a U-shaped relationship between volume and benefits, and that they have seen that a kind of on the outer limits that there are some emerging negative impacts on mental health when things are kind of out of balance. So a lot of the things that they see with athletes when it's sort of out of balance are depression, anxiety, there's a high risk of eating disorders, things like that. And so there's a lot of reason to sort of look at these things in consideration and kind of think about how they show up in your life. Some of you all mentioned stress, for example. And so I'm curious, I absolutely hear from everybody that physical activity is an outlet for everybody in terms of managing stress. And we all know that stress can have a really negative impact on our mental and physical health. But But one thing I find really interesting when we're thinking about endurance athletes is that training is in and of itself a form of stress, right? And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on that in terms of when we think about stress as something that we need to manage in our lives, how we kind of balance that with the stress that we intentionally put on our bodies through physical activity and training. I'm curious if anybody has thoughts on that or questions. How do you manage that in your own lives?
I think for me, I been training for triathlon for quite a number of years now, very structured. So I'm pretty well aware when the harder weeks are going to be. Like this week I have a test coming up on the bike. So like it's a little stressful. It's going to be really hard. You're kind of dreading it. You're kind of excited about it. So like knowing that, and then like right before races, like knowing what weeks are going to be harder and kind of preparing for that, and maybe not scheduling as many things those weeks, like just being conscious about it. But I guess I have the luxury too of like having structured training in that way. So I know, whereas I know that's not everyone's case.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. So finding ways to sort of offset the load, right? And kind of recalibrate, be aware of it. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, like Hunter, I have structured training. I use a coach, I hire a coach, and understanding that some weeks it's heavier stress on the body and it's set up to build and peak, and then easy weeks. So it's less stress on the body. So I think of it as the physical stress, even though there is a mental stress component to it, especially when you get into the racing mode. It can be stressful, and you have to learn how to deal with the anxiety and stress, which is very normal, pre-race. So stress is definitely a factor. But I think knowing the workouts and what's coming and the easy weeks, and then knowing how to deal with it, for the high anxiety times is very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too, what I heard you say is sort of recognizing that there is going to be the mental stress component at the same time, often as the physical stress component is increasing in volume, right. And preparing for that. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Part of the stress is just fitting the training into a busy life.
There it is. Yep.
Even though I'm retiring in a few months, it's still, life is busy for everybody.
It's a huge part. Yeah.
So that's a factor.
Yeah. I think that's kind of one of the underlying things too, with this sort of concept of gentle health that I talk about a lot in our work, is that the line where the focus on physical health begins to detract from our mental health is where we're off balance, right? And that and this is something we talk a lot about in terms of nutrition, for example, is if your focus on nutrition is causing you to be entirely focused on that thing, you're in fact increasing your stress, right? And so at the end of the day, if being hyper focused on one part of your physical health or your physical health to the exclusion of other things is ultimately doing harm, right, by increasing your stress, increasing your anxiety, things like that, then it deserves some curiosity. Does that make sense? And so we think a lot about that in terms of gentle health, is kind of where's the space where I can maximize my physical health without impacting my mental health. And that's a dance. I've gotten away from using the word balance, actually, because balance implies that there's some perfect place. And there just isn't, right? In our normal lives, there's not. There's always a little more of this or a little more of that and a little bit of that. And that has to be okay too, right? If we're going to thrive.
Is that like the fun factor? When does this not become fun anymore?
Yes. I just was talking about this the other day. Who said that? Yes. I would say yes. Do you want to say more about that, or what your understanding of that is? Oh, I think you're muted. You're remuted.
Yeah, this is Kim. I mentioned that because I'm not nearly the endurance athlete that some of these women that are on this meeting are, but I always consider the fun factor for me. And I think what you were just referring to is just that. I guess that's when the scale tips from physical to mental, and it becomes unstable, I guess I would call it. is when my brain goes to, is this fun anymore for me? Do I want to continue this if I'm losing the fun factor? So that's what it means to me.
That's awesome. I love that you're dialed into that for yourself. That can be a hard sell.
Kim also retired and decided to do a triathlon. So
I
that's
love
pretty
that.
cool. Pretty cool.
I love that. Yay. Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that's tough as I was sort of thinking about this discussion, and it's interesting because I do actually wear kind of a lot of hats in terms of like athletic ambassador and therapist, and I'm also a triathlete, and depending on the community, right, like the tone is going to be a little bit different. And so I was thinking about this conversation and what might be different about it, and one thing that occurred to me was, I grew up in sports, and I can say with great confidence, we are pretty acculturated into no pain, no gain, going hard and things like that. And they find their way into all areas of sports. And I appreciate, Kim, your point about fun is that we start kids pretty young with a lot more structure and a lot less fun. And I coached kids, and, I feel relatively dialed into that. And I think that just continues, and our culture is very geared toward production, right? And I think that can be it's very present in sports. And I think that can be very hard to notice. To your point, Kim, if you're not even being told that fun's supposed to be part of it, you actually don't really have a good measure for it's no longer fun, right? So you have to have that sort of primary awareness to notice when it's off kilter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounded like, did you want to add something?
No, I just think it's something that I try to remind myself, and kids is a perfect example of it, even more easily for us. If they aren't having fun, if you're not having fun with them, doing something with them, you for me need to take a step back and reassess, why are we doing this?
Right. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that dance between fun and production? Because I don't want to take away from it. I mean, I think that's the other thing that's unique in this particular community and conversation is you wouldn't be in cycling, and in sports if you didn't also really enjoy accomplishing things, right? And checking boxes and accomplishing goals. And that's valid, right? And I wouldn't want to minimize that either. And so it's finding kind of where that sweet spot is for each of us, that we can feel that we're being productive in accomplishing what are meaningful to us, without slipping into space that ultimately is harming our mental health. I
think something else to add to that too is I'm going through this a bit right now where my definition of fun is changing. And trying to find the balance to fit in like all the things I want to do. And what does that look like? And that's probably going to be different from previous years when I kind of had one sole focus, and now I'm focusing on a few different things. So that's something like I'm actively going through.
That's a great point, that your definition of fun changes and your definition of meaningful changes. And I think that's huge. And it also makes me think of, I was just having a conversation with some folks in my program an hour ago about the idea of flexibility, and how important that is to feeling that we're still engaging in a meaningful way with our goals. And so I think to your point, Hunter, one of the things I often talk about with folks is that it has to be okay for the marker to change, right? For the goal line to change. Injury happens. Somebody mentioned injury earlier. Injury happens, right? Life happens. The bar has to move. And that if we're able to make that flex, we can continue to enjoy it, right? It can continue to be fun. It continue to feel productive. If we can't make that flex, that's when, again, we're going to find ourselves in this really misaligned, unhappy place and have to kind of ask that question, why am I doing this? Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
I like the idea of fun always. And I'm pretty focused on the structured training, but to remind myself to have fun. And what popped into my mind, a group of us often swim at this lake in the summer, Friday mornings, 6 a.m. And we went through a period where we were swimming over to one of those trampoline raft things. We weren't supposed to, but we did. And our big thing was to do cannonballs, like we were the cannonball kids. And that, it's just such a great memory. So I think you can do all that training, but you're going to remember the fun, silly things that you do. So if I can keep that in my mind, do the training, but insert some fun, to me, that's my sweet spot.
Your sweet spot. Exactly.
Yeah, gotta have fun.
Yes.
Because it can be hard work.
Mhm. Kim, did you want to add something?
No, it just that reminded me when my daughter was younger, she always wore fancy socks to soccer. They were always like out of the uniform color, and it was just a fun experience, and just the way that she added fun to doing something that she enjoyed doing. And we can, as adults, do that as well. Wear fun shorts or wear fun shirts, just something fun like that. To just add to the flavor of the workout, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, I mean, you all bring up a good point. It's something that I don't talk as much in my work about, maybe not in these terms, but that I think for many of us in endurance sports, part of the fun is the hard part, right? Is type 2 fun, right? There's a reason type 2 fun exists as a phrase. Does everybody know that phrase? I'm guessing so. No? Does anybody want to give your interpretation of type 2 fun? Looks like not everybody is clear on it. I'm happy to. It's essentially the idea that type 1 fun is just pure, like your feet are kicked up at the lake and you're not moving and you're just basking in the sun, right? And type 2 fun, you're working really hard the whole time, and at the end, and you're suffering basically, and at the end you feel really good and you're glad you did it and you want to do it again, right? Type 3 fun usually ends in the hospital. So like type 1 for folks in endurance sports, like that's a brain wiring thing, for sure. And I think that is also a thing that I believe keeps people engaged in endurance sports, right? Is if you have that kind of wiring that you sincerely kind of enjoy the hard part, you're engaged with it, right? And that's great. And I think also from the mental health perspective is the place where being really curious about yourself and dialed into yourself becomes really important. If you really love the hard stuff and you're wired to do the hard stuff, and most folks in this sport tend to be wired toward discipline and time management, structure, and things like that, and that's great. That's where being curious though about yourself and noticing can be even trickier and really even more important, because you're going to go down a different rabbit hole than some other folks might, right? And that's the one where you're all in, all here, all the time, and losing touch with some of those other things that kind of recalibrate. I don't know if that resonates for people or sounds possible.
Yeah, I think for me it does. I often think about folks that do have coaches, because it kind of takes away the some of the mental drain on an athlete if you have a coach, I would think, because you don't have to do the scheduling. It's straightforward. It's on a piece of paper, that type of thing. But also it probably has other challenges as well, because it does take away that drain. It just seems that coaching might add a different dimension for it for some folks. Having a coach or not having a coach is, I guess, where I'm going with that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to it for sure. Like, yeah, it takes out the mental drain. You like wake up and you read the thing, but then it's also like an added stress too. And someone else that's like looking at your workouts and that you kind of want to like do something for, and you don't want to disappoint, right? Like, it's like accountability, but also you feel guilty when you miss a workout or you don't do it as written. But yeah, it is a tricky thing. But I also think it's like something you're wired for too. Like, do you like that, or do you like diving into your own workouts and like learning that on your own? Like, I'd much rather have someone tell me what to do than me to do the research myself. Then the other thing I was going to say was, oh, go ahead.
Well, I think at some point, is that an added stress, which is probably something that has to be balanced as well.
Right.
You know, when you do have a coach, it adds a different level of stress perhaps sometimes. And how do you balance all that is just something that might be tricky for other folks too, adding another level.
Yeah, so like my part two kind of, and someone said something before that kind of reminded me of this. I am like a firm believer in taking like 6 to 8 weeks like fully off. I barely work out. I don't use my coach. And that has really worked for me. And I've seen people that kind of train hard through things and it like hasn't worked out. And I'm like, every time I see something like that, I'm like, this is why for me, like those 6 to 8 weeks are so important. So I guess that's one way I find a balance in it.
You're just great. That's also a really good segue into kind of concrete stuff, is how can we kind of take these things into account in our training? That's a great one, Hunter. And I think you're right. I mean, it's one of those things. I think partly we have trouble, again, in our culture, because we sort of glorify work, right? And there's so much messaging out there about no days off, right? And grinding. And so it can be easier, you know, when we think about mental health issues in sports, a lot of stuff goes undetected, in part because there's a lot of bias in the healthcare system where if you look healthy, stuff slides into the radar. And so I think this is the kind of stuff, and particularly if you're, you know, in a system or on a team where asking for help isn't encouraged in the same way that it ought to be. And about this stuff isn't being normalized. Things fly under the radar really easily because this is a community, or this is a sport and a society that really emphasizes work, like 6 to 8 weeks off, you know, and that's something that's different, right, in this sport as opposed to being the norm. And I think that's how that becomes a very slippery slope for people. Overtraining burns people all the time, all the time. So thoughts. So one of the first ones I thought about talking about was when you look at your training cycles. So you guys already started talking about this, but things that you can do. So just kind of concrete ideas that you might have about how do you balance your mental health when you just look at your training schedule, whether you do it for yourself or with a coach. So you already started kind of talking about this, taking intentional breaks. It sounded like was one idea. Jane?
Well, the coach that I have, she's not all year. I'd say she's about 9 months out of the year. And then the other 3 months I'm active, but I'm not doing structured training, you know, and I have more time to do, you know, play golf or something, let's say. So I guess I'm like Hunter in that regard, but Hunter, you make it sound like you don't do anything during those 6 to 8 weeks. I know you do.
I do some things. I catch up on my like to-do list, things I haven't done in the house all year.
I think it's nice to have the balance. I like the structure. I get a weekly training plan. I lay it out, you know, around everything, you know, in my life. And then I like those months that I don't have that. And I create my own things I need to do. So that's my type of balance. And you mentioned earlier, long-term, Marianna, where I've been in multi-sport for over 30 years. And when I started, I had 3 young children, and I knew I wanted the lifestyle for a long time. I just, deep down, I knew, I loved being fit, feeling healthy, bad family history. So this was my choice. And I always saw it as a long-term lifestyle. Most of my friends have gone doing Ironman and all this. I've never been drawn to that because I've always looked at it as kind of like, I don't want to do the excessive things and hurt myself and get burnt out. I want to just kind of pace myself through it. And I've had decent success with that.
That's awesome.
Every year is different too. So I've always looked at it as a long-term lifestyle choice.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Triathlon is a lifestyle choice.
It is.
I love that. That's rad.
It has been.
That's cool.
You know, even at work, I've been with this company for 15 years. A lot of people there don't even know this is, you know, my lifestyle. My boss does.
Oh, wow.
I don't talk about it. It's just, it's like my professional life and then my personal life. That's just not me. I mean, they may know a little bit, but they really just don't know. I
That's
go to the gym
amazing.
every day. That's about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That flies in the face of every meme and every joke ever made about triathletes.
I know. I definitely, I kind of fit the norm, but I don't,
That's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And I'm still doing it. I think this is I don't even know, 31st or 32nd year.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
That's very cool. Okay. Yeah. So thinking it's your mindset about it, right? So thinking about it
yeah,
as your lifestyle. Okay.
healthy lifestyle. So that's why the word balance, and I know there's no such thing. I've always, tried to have that in all areas of my life.
Mhm.
I'm kind of a middle of the road person, so I'm not excessive, and having that long-term vision has kind of kept me grounded, I think.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And the vision, we were just talking about flexibility earlier, the vision is the roots, right? If you've got the vision, you can be flexible with the how, right?
Yeah.
Mhm. That makes sense.
I found a lot of fun. I'm kind of in a weird transition right now. I don't really know what my goal is. I'm just kind of having fun doing whatever I feel like doing at the moment. So I've been doing a lot of weightlifting and running, but what I also love to do is look for free classes around town. So I look for yoga, hot yoga. There was that empowered class that we went to. There's like all these different kinds of working out, like the boxing classes too. Like I try to mix those in a bunch and kind of find like another activity to do. Not that I'm going to really join those, but throwing that in once or twice a month kind of makes working out a little more fun and gets you out of the groove, because I like structure, but very loose structure. So just adding in different types of workouts and group workouts and stuff. It's been fun.
I love that. I've actually never heard that suggestion ever from anybody. Picking free classes around and checking different things out. That's brilliant.
Most places have at least one free class, so it's been fun to check it out.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Yeah. I mean, you guys have, and I'd love to hear other thoughts. Just another couple, making a point to, so thinking about, right, like, because it's easy, I think, when we talk about our training schedules to think about it purely in terms of the physical load, right, and the volume and what your physical activity looks like in those weeks or at those times. I think one thing that I have talked about with other people and can be useful is also to think about in a high volume week, scheduling downtime that isn't physical activity related. So it isn't simply, I'm going to lie down in the Epsom salts, which is valid, but really thinking I need actual downtime that doesn't have to do with my volume right now in my training, right? So making sure that in our high volume weeks, whether you're scheduling yourself or with a coach, that you're also being intentional about, I'm also going to play this week, right? I need to make sure to take my run out to a playground, right? Or whatever the case may be. That's really that's not a good example because that's definitely sports. But really letting yourself have something that's apart from the training and the training volume, particularly in those high volume weeks. Did you have a thought, Jane?
Yeah. Does Netflix count?
I think it does. Yes.
Works for me.
I think it does. Yeah.
Definitely love Netflix. Yeah.
Part and parcel with that, I've been doing a lot of reflecting on and reading around rest as an intentional practice. And there's a fantastic book. There are lots of really great books out about it, but one is around the concept of rest as a sort of active resistance and resistance against a lot of forces in our lives that take away our autonomy and ownership. And so I think thinking about that in terms of endurance sports, I think most of us, or I know I did, kind of were raised in sports with the idea of, make sure you have a rest day, right? Once a month, once a week or once every rotation of days, as opposed to every day. There should be some degree of rest built into our lives, right? We benefit from having intentional time where our brains are quiet, right? And whatever that looks like for each one of us, it's worth some consideration. You know, how do I build intentional rest into my day, right? Not just waiting for the 7th day when I get that rest day, right? But how do you get some of that load off of your body every day? Is I think, a valid question to ask ourselves. Any other thoughts on kind of rest or building that in? So when we're thinking about our training cycles, how to kind of building in that fatigue balance, the stress balance. Any other thoughts on that?
That's books, that's yoga, that's calling friends, touching base with family, siblings. Those can be intentional, away from the chaos of an event or challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I've also made it a point, like every day, I'm actually walking on a treadmill, which right now, which is why I'm I keep turning my video off. But I like to go on my treadmill when like my legs are feeling like bad from a run. Like a lot of the time I want to just sit down. But I know moving and getting the blood moving will help. And like I work from home all day. So for me to get my body moving is good. Because if I don't walk at all, I'm walking like 700 steps a day and it's like not good for recovery. Like that will hurt me in the long run. So I find it relaxing to walk and it gets the blood moving, just gets the mind moving. And when I'm not at my computer, I love to read. I've been getting into reading and just trying to keep screen time to a minimum. It definitely helps. And even just walking like into my backyard, doing a couple laps, like seeing the sun, like I know a lot of us work from home. So just making sure like we're getting sun on our skin and like getting out into the woods, really just like seeing natural stuff rather than just like the lights and the computers all day. It can definitely change the mood and just make you feel better.
Yeah. A lot of what you all are saying too is, I'm sure you know, like just good practice, right? In general, whether it's a high volume week or not, like those are just really, really good ways to take care of yourself in general, for sure. Yeah. The only other one I would add to the bit about training is, and I don't know if many of you do this, but having a backup workout for a day that I don't remember, you know, I think it's in a triathlon podcast that I heard this phrase, but it was be the athlete you are that day. And I thought that was such a useful piece of guidance, that we wake up, we look at the training, you know, workout in your training plan, and your body might have completely different ideas about what needs to happen that day. And if we can be responsive to that, we're building trust with our bodies, right? Our bodies are happier when they can trust that we're going to take care of them and listen to them. And so I do this with lots of folks, is having like a plan A, a plan B. You know, so I'm sure some of you might, you know, you have the long run route and then you have, I barely got out the door today route, right? On your bike or whatever the case. And I think that can be really helpful when you're following a training plan, is giving yourself, and that may involve a conversation, right? With your coach, with yourself, saying, you know, some days I need to recognize that this might be the case and this is the backup plan, so that you still feel, you know, that you checked the box, so to speak, in a way that still felt meaningful to you, but you also listened to and respected what your body was saying. So I don't know if you guys have any experience with that, or that's something that you have found useful, but I tend to think that can be useful. So in the same vein, building intuition and trust with your body is another big one that we talk a lot about. And I'm curious how that sounds to you all, what that idea sounds like. Have you heard that phrasing before? Having an intuitive relationship with your body? Kim, it looks like you're saying yeah, maybe. What are your thoughts on that, or what have you heard about that?
Just if I'm sore or if I feel down, and sometimes you have to judge how down you are, because getting out and doing the exercise, you can come through that.
Mm-hmm.
Other times it's like, no, I really do need to just sit on the couch with a book. And sometimes when I do that, I find out a couple hours later, I'm sick.
Right. That's a great point. I think too, sometimes this concept can be a hard sell for people sometimes, because we don't always trust, and sometimes rightfully, that is that real fatigue, or do I just not feel like it, right? And I think that can be hard to distinguish sometimes. And I think that's where self-compassion comes in, is you are going to make the wrong call sometimes, right? You are going to ultimately be 18 chapters into the book, like, gosh, I probably could have gotten outside today. And being able to say, you know what, I tried, right? I tried to listen to my body. I tried to respond to it, and I got 18 chapters read. So whatever. But I think, yeah, that's a good point. Being able to kind of listen and respond with whichever thing feels like the right thing in that moment, and knowing that, I've said this 1,000 times, there's not a single workout that's going to make or break, your race season or whatever the case. Yeah, that's a great point. So this is something, and this is just a gentle plug, for if anybody's heard of it, but we talk a lot about intuitive relationships with our body. We talk a lot about a concept of intuitive eating. And I'm not going to go way down the rabbit hole talking about it. But I will say that as a method of sort of reconnecting with our body's signals and needs, I haven't found a better method than intuitive eating. And it is a practice, and it is a tough practice. It's not a simple thing, but it can be a very supportive tool for folks in kind of supporting sustainable long-term health, is kind of practicing some of these ways of kind of noticing your hunger, being curious about your hunger, being curious about your body. There are sections it's a workbook, and there are sections in there about movement. And so I think kind of going off the idea of your body was born wise, and then we sort of get socialized away from learning to trust our body, from trusting our bodies and recognizing our body's cues, that at any point in life, we still have a chance to go back to reconnecting with that. And that could be really hard, and also really, really important. So I say that to say that the idea of an intuitive relationship with your body does extend to physical activity and rest, but is really tough to do if you're not practicing it, right? And if you're not doing kind of, Kim, like your example, saying, I think today's a book couch day. I could be wrong, but I'm going with couch and book, and practicing it, right? And figuring out, okay, until you can tell the difference, right? This is mood, motivation, this is fatigue, need to lie down, or whatever the case may be. So I have just a couple of thoughts, and I would love to hear yours on kind of just very simple tips on kind of rebuilding that connection with our brain and our body. So does anybody have any thoughts before on what that might look like? I think, Kim, you just gave a great example. Honoring your tiredness. I'll throw some out. Feel free to, if that's something that you practice, say like, yes, that always works, or whatever the case. Honoring your hunger. This is a tough one for some folks, for lots and lots of reasons. In my work, something I often say is one of my least favorite things about diet culture is the suggestion that when you're hungry, you should drink water. Water and food are not the same thing. And I think it's great to be curious, right? And to say, is this thirst or is this hunger? But drinking water to fill ourselves up is just rupturing that relationship and that ability to trust our bodies and trust our body's cues. So I think honoring your hunger is a really big one. And that can mean lots of things for lots of people. We could spend an entire hour talking about it. But I think just as a simple practice, being compassionately curious when you notice your hunger, noticing what kind of automatic messages might come up for yourself. There's lots of, oh, I just ate an hour ago, I can't possibly be hungry. That's kind of an automatic thought, as opposed to, really listening to your body. And that's worth being curious about. So I would say there's so much we could say about that, but just being curious about your hunger and trying to respond to it is huge. Did you want to say something, Hunter?
Oh yeah, I eat all the time, nonstop. um 3 days a week I'm on the road for work, and my boss, she like knows I have this lunchbox that's massive, and I always try to have like leftovers for lunch from dinner before, but I have like 8 zillion snacks and my big old thing of water, and she like laughs and she knows. She's like, I have to feed Hunter or she gets hangry, because that's what I need to eat. But yeah, and I laugh about it too, because my boyfriend like doesn't do triathlon or anything. He lifts weights and he like barely eats breakfast, and I eat 2 breakfasts every day. And I'm just like that's the only way like I feel okay, right? And I'm like, I can't be like my best self at work if I'm hungry. I know that, and everyone around me knows that. But I don't leave the house without my big old lunch bags.
It's good. That's good. It's a good practice. Yeah.
Well, the workouts make us hungry.
Well, that's valid.
And I know, I feel like I'm in tune to my hunger after a race or a big workout. I'm not hungry right away, but a couple hours later, I'm famished. And I know that's the time for me to have a meal. But yeah, I think swimming in particular, swimming in cold water will really get you hungry.
I was just gonna say that I don't care what anyone says, swimming makes me the most hungry. Every time I could eat the second I get out of the pool every time.
Oh yeah.
I have
And
my like
here's-
emergency car snacks for after
Me
the
too.
school.
Me too, for sure. For sure. And it's weird. It doesn't even matter how long of a swim. Like a short swim, I'm still starving.
Yeah.
It is
It'll do
odd.
it.
Yeah. So honoring your hunger. Absolutely. Honoring your need for rest. I know we've talked about that in some detail. So just kind of putting that in your back pocket. The more it's really thinking about befriending, right? Again, is this your relationship with yourself, your body is the only permanent relationship you'll have, right? It's you and you till the end. So that should be a relationship where you have trust, and where you can respond and be compassionate, be kind above everything. And so these are all sort of, how do I just in small ways practice befriending, right? And being kind, and being responsive. So rest. And then the other two I've thrown in here, I know I'm moving a little bit fast now, time and reflection, I think is a really big one in terms of that reconnecting with ourselves. And it sounds like many of you kind of have those practices, but journaling, reading, sitting quietly, meditating, right? All of those things I do think are part of the idea of gentle health and of kind of honoring that intersection of mental and physical health, and building that relationship with ourselves, right? Is taking time to just be with ourselves, be in solitude with ourselves. Any thoughts on that? Sound useful?
When I was in college, I wanted to like really make this one meet, and I was kind of far away from it. So I was talking to my coach, and I had to make the cut for it. And she the next day handed me a journal, and I wrote everything from like how much I slept, how much I ate, like everything about the day. And it didn't really matter like so much what I was doing, but more of how in tune I was. And everything I did, I was focusing on this goal. So I in turn made better decisions. It wasn't really like, I didn't really look back and was like, okay, I ate this that day, I need to do that exact thing. It was more just like, keep your mindset on this one goal. And it only took like 4 weeks, and I was like down a bunch of time, and I didn't really change anything. I was just mentally way more prepared. So journaling, I will stand by every single time. And another thing, just writing down goals that are like definitely visible. So when I was in high school, I would write them all over my binders. Right now, I don't really have anything that I like carry with me all the time, but I would set like a phone background if I had a time I wanted to hit or anything. But like just seeing that time or like the goal just really helps you keep on track. So just writing stuff down in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jane, is your goal board still in your bathroom?
No, it's in my home office / mudroom / piano room. It's in there. And that's fun. It's something we've done with our group. Marianna is, we have a goal setting meeting, and we have these boards, and we use chalk and write down about 5 or 6 key goals for the year. And I think in our group from last year, just about everybody achieved their goals, or for reasons like injury or whatever, they pushed them to this year. So, we accomplished them, and I think it felt good, to talk about them. We checked in throughout the year. So like Madison was saying, writing it down and kind of keeping it visible was really helpful. I'm a writer too. I don't journal that much, but I'm jotting down notes as we talk here. Seeing words, I guess I'm a visual learner, but just seeing words helps me. That's why I love seeing people's names on Zoom. That's how I memorize names. I have to see the written version. So I'm a word type of person. So I think with goals, tying it all together, writing things down is helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that going off of that with like the talking about like reflection and stuff, it's like, within our group, like we've got a lot of people that like know a lot about each other and are really comfortable with each other. And it's fun just to like reflect and talk things out. And then even like within my family, like after a race, like people that know me the best and know how I'm going to feel, just like talking things out with them. And I'm like, most of the time it's like usually pretty positive, but just like for them to understand like certain aspects of the race and going back and reflecting on that. So I do that. Like, yes, there's times I do it on my own, but I also like to do it within our group. Or after a big race, you go to the next local triathlon and you talk about it the whole night, right? It's just kind of fun to do. And I think we're fortunate in our group. Like I said, a lot of us know a lot about each other and train together and follow each other's races. And so that's like a fun layer that we have.
And even some of us, and Hunter, you're really good at writing a race report, and you put your emotion into it and what went well, what went wrong, and the days leading up. I think it benefits those of us that are reading the race report. I know you're expressing it and, kind of documenting it, but I think it's helpful, especially for maybe people that have less experience, to see what you've been through, the ups and downs of, I'm thinking your race in Utah, when you did that, it was a world championship and it's like high drama the whole way.
Yeah.
But it's great to read it and understand what you went through, because obviously, we couldn't go out there to cheer you on. But to read your report, I think was really helpful.
Yeah. And that's like, I think those are fun too. And that's where, I think about social media a lot. And for me, like social media serves me pretty well with my group and your family and things like that. But then I also I think like a lot of people, right, they try to be as genuine as they can to be like, hey, let me help someone else out. And I get a lot, like I'm mentoring a new triathlete through this other group. And she was like, I was so nervous to talk to you because you're so fast and you know so much about, and I'm like, no, but this is why we're doing this, right? Is like, because we all started somewhere, and like simply telling her like, yes, I started a run walk plan too. And I still walk hills and races, right? And she was like, oh my God, I'm so glad you said that. Because it's just like, it's like, kind of like not forgetting where you came from, right? Like we all started somewhere, and a lot of us started in very similar spots, right? We weren't, Maddie's lucky because she swims, but for a lot of us, it's like, yeah, the first time I got in the lake, I froze and didn't swim a single stroke. And my dad went and did his workout and picked me up, still sitting on the shore. Like I still remember it.
And I think that's part of the mental health piece, is the sharing, collaborating, our various groups that get together, be it on Zoom or swimming together. I think, that's a real positive thing. You feel like you're part of a community, like, we're kind of all in this together, the ups and downs. So for me, that's, a part of the positive side of the mental health to the wellness.
For sure.
Is the social connections.
I'm so tickled because the last section I had here was about social connectedness and community.
You got it.
You guys just wrapped it up.
Nailed it.
That was
all right.
Because exactly. It's doing things in community, it's connectedness. It just is such an enormous part of our well-being. And all of you obviously get that or you wouldn't be here in this group. But everything you're describing, right? And the giving back and the, looking out for each other, all of that. Yeah, that was, that was perfect.
And
Exactly.
what I love about our group too is like, as you can tell, we're like all very different ages, but we like all get along really well.
Yeah,
And
it's wonderful.
like my boyfriend laughs, he's like, all your old lady friends. And I'm like, leave them alone. I go out to dinner with Jane and Kathy all the time.
I'm older than Hunter's parents, so.
But I think that's like, I love that too, right? Because it's like different dimensions of our sport. Like I like to think I help Jane in some form or fashion, right? But like all the wisdom that like she has and brings to me too, right? And it's really cool. I think it's a really, really cool dynamic.
I don't think we think of each other as ages.
Yeah.
We think of ourselves, as athletes and friends. And I think personally, since 2020, the social side of it, I felt very isolated, during that period. We're empty nesters. My husband was going into work. I was home alone in a basement office. And, I appreciate the group that much more since that time period, especially. Like I realized I really need that social connection, not on just social media, but I mean, in person and going to races and talking to people, like just hearing how they're feeling before a race, as an example, because we've all been there and we know what it's about. So, yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you. This was very fun.
Well, thank you.
I enjoyed having this conversation with you all.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? Any questions about notes we took? I think someone had a drop in the chat, but
yeah,
there's some.
I like to, we have a lot of counselors in our group, and we had like quite a few like similar but different talks. And I think for whoever was on Lisa's talk, like there was some connections to, and again, it's like different viewpoints and perspectives, but all kind of getting to like the same idea, which I really like when things work out pretty like that.
Synergistically.
Yeah. She was like, her talk was much more focused on like the mind-body connection. She's an art therapist.
Okay.
And so like it was really dialed in on that. And I actually just got this book that she recommended
Cool.
in her talk. So I'm like curious to read it, like both for me and for like my clients. But yeah, I love when the similar messages is portrayed throughout so many different talks that we have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will throw a book out there that I would also recommend. Called Reclaiming Body Trust. That kind of covers a lot of what we're talking about.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, there are tons, but
I know so many.
So many.
I like keep adding them onto my book list, and I'm like,
too.
I'm not gonna get through all of these, but I'll keep adding.
Audiobooks.
My favorite.
Oh, such a difference with training, especially. Well, cool. It was very nice to meet all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And you're on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Is that the best way to get in contact with you if anyone had follow-up questions? Or
yeah, that works. Or I'll put my email. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can put when I post the video, I'll put your email in there too.
Yeah, that's probably easier. I'm also working on screen time, so I'm only on Facebook a little bit. So as long as I'm sticking with my intention, it won't be easy to reach me there. So. All right. Thank you all very
so much. Have a great night, everyone.
Take care. Good night.
Bye. Bye-bye.